Well, thank you, Matt. And I promise I won't delay too much your lunch time. So I think one important thing that I would like to share with you, one of the main approach that we're trying to put in the new leadership of IndustriALL Global Union is really that we have to focus our work towards the global supply chains. Because when we talk about precarious work, so sometimes we don't have the dimension of how it's spread worldwide. So if we consider that we represent 50 million workers, IndustriALL Global Union, and all the global unions, federations together, they represent about 200 million. So let's put some more from the Chinese and from WCFTU. And if we consider the self-employed people, we have a formal market of about 1 billion people in the planet. But, you know, out of the 4 billion people that are in age of work in the world, so 3 billion people, they are either unemployed, unprotected, or protected, or they're just in an informal sector. So that's the most precarious work that we can find everywhere. And we as unions that work in the formal sector try to organize to make the formal sector, bring people from informality to the formal sector. So the main focus for us is fighting the precarious forms of work that we have worldwide, among them informal work. We are seeing in every country that I've traveled since I started, and there were a lot of them that I met in these first 7 months, and we can see that, you know, the capital has its ways to start precarious work. So it's very nice to hear the experience of EF Metall here, that they can organize the agency workers. So it's a very good experience that we are willing to learn, and that comes through collective bargaining. And so what we're trying to understand, and that everybody, so we're trying to organize our work in terms of clusters of industries, so that we can better understand the global supply chains. And one good example that we have, for example, we have here in Sweden this huge brand of garment, H&M, with which we have a global framework agreement. And it's very interesting with the major brands of clothes, because they rarely have production. So they have normally a headquarter with design, with marketing, with finance, administration, and so on, but they don't produce. So all of the production they have, it's spread all over the world. And in countries normally where precarious work evolves, and then, as I mentioned yesterday, so there are lots of countries which intend to be positioned in the global supply chains as a low standard for working conditions. So they try hard to keep the labor standards very low, so that they can be competitive in the world. And that's something that brings every time governments to violate trade union rights, to deny the workers the right to organize. But it's not only in places like we normally think about, you know, Nazma is not here, we always think about Asia, Southeast Asia, but we can also say we can find precarious work in Mexico, where workers have worked for $1 an hour to supply to US and Canada for cars that will be sold by $30,000. So precarious work, it's unlimited. So our main focus is to really, one of the tools to use to try to fight precarious work is through our global framework agreements. Of course, there is always the discussion that, you know, it doesn't work for South US because the companies systematically disrespect the global framework agreements that work in all the world. But it's one of the tools that we have in hand. And for example, I would like just to say that particularly the H&M, Inditex, and Chibo, the three garment companies in which we have a global framework agreement, we're about to negotiate another one with Mango, another big brands of garment. It was fundamental for us to solve the problem in Bangladesh. What happened in Bangladesh that we said briefly, and Nazma also mentioned? There was an attempt of the workers to fight for increase their minimum wage. And then the reaction of the companies and the government was to put union leaders in jail, to fire workers, to close down the unions. And it was very, very strong reaction from the government, because there is this idea that they are not competitive with Cambodia, not competitive with Myanmar, not competitive with Vietnam, so they want to keep as low as possible. And so that was a very crucial moment for us, for the union movement in general, and especially for us in the global supply chain in the garment industry, because when we use you know, all the instruments of campaigns that we did, putting pressure on the embassies, sending messages to the government, and putting pressure especially in the brands in which we have global framework agreements, it was fundamental for us to solve this. Because the companies, H&M included, we had a meeting in the middle of the crisis with the Employers Association, and we said to the brands that if they didn't kind of boycott a big fair that would take place in Bangladesh, you know, we would start campaigning in front of the stores of these brands all over the world. And then the companies were very firm position, saying that the employers should solve the situation together with the government, and that was absolutely crucial for us to solve. So one of the tools that we have are global framework agreements, but of course we cannot rely in just one tool. It's one of the tools that we have, but of course everything, you know, comes as the 5 strategic goals that we set. So defend trade union rights so that the workers have freedom of association and the right for collective bargaining. So that comes first, so that the unions can organize, and we don't. We try not to be paternalistic with our unions. So we have to give full conditions for them so that they can organize themselves and build stronger unions so that they can, in a course of time, be able to improve the working conditions. I think one good example that we have, and we are working hard to have this kind of vision that we have to prioritize the global supply chains, is Indonesia. So 10, 15 years ago, the Federation, FSPMI, for example, was created, and in a very short period of time, we supported a lot, you know, the Indonesians, the Indonesian brothers and sisters, and they evolved very quickly. Now they have a very strong unions, and they put the thing about living wage in the center of their fight. So they had a lot of evolution in the meantime. And that's the idea that we want to use, because if we just keep our focus in the fancy brands, you know, they like Volvo, like Scania, like H&M. So if we just keep the focus on the big transnational, so they represent, we have only 6% of the workforce employed in the transnational. So 94% stays in the global supply chain. So that's the focus that we trying to put, and it is possible when we act together in solidarity and we give full support for our brothers and sisters in the growing areas of the planet, especially South and East and Southeast Asia, so that they can organize, build stronger unions, and improve the working conditions. So that's the condition that we have for the workers to have a better insertion in the globalization process. Of course, we also discussed in our last executive committee that we should have a better discussion about trade, because we have different positions among our affiliates, but we must have a say of the workers, and that's something that we also discussed in the beginning of this week in the Labor 20 Summit, that we gave a statement to Prime Minister Merkel in Germany. So we delivered a statement so that we want a fair globalization process, so that the trade union rights are in the center of the decisions of the G20 that will meet early July in Hamburg. So that was the clear message that we got. Then we have a meeting also with the labor ministers of the G20. Jenny Holdcroft was there, our Assistant General Secretary. And we have very good progress in that meetings as well. So that's basically, in a nutshell, what trying to focus on our work of IndustriALL Global Union, so that we can contribute to the struggle of the workers, especially in the global supply chain. Thank you very much.